Okay, so welcome to the Undergraduate Research Education Series. Welcome back if you have been to any of these sessions before. We have a large number of folks who have registered for this event, which is very exciting to me always. So I'm going to start like we always do with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll talk about that housekeeping for getting your attendance all checked off and taken care of. And then we are going to hear from Director Meligha Garfield, the director of the Black Cultural Center here at the U, about anti-Blackness and research in higher education, which is a super necessary topic, and I'm really excited to learn from him today. So the American Indian Resource Center leads the way for me to acknowledge that the land that the University of Utah resides on has always been on Indigenous lands, specifically on the lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. I encourage you all to think about the Indigenous peoples of whatever land you're on today if you are not also in Salt Lake City as well. It's imperative that we acknowledge the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. Through this land acknowledgement, I want to express my personal gratitude and appreciation for their persevering to protect this land for future generations. The erasure of this relationship between Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands is an insidious form of ongoing colonization, and we need to build our mindfulness of this and of other Indigenous protocols. And in my opinion, a first step, a necessary step to respecting Indigenous peoples is to give the land back. Okay, so some housekeeping. If you have logged in real time, you are on this Zoom call right now. Your attendance has been logged. You don't have to do anything else to take care of that at all. If you are watching this video later for your education series attendance for any number of research programs this summer, please go to the top of the Undergraduate Research Education Series page and look for that evaluation form. Fill that out with your unit. That's the only way that I can know that you watched the video and get that tracked for you. And I will also drop a link to that evaluation in the chat for the folks in the call currently. That's optional for you, but we always love your feedback. It helps us make a good series for you all. Okay, housekeeping done. Director Garfield.
All right. Thank you so much, Ivor. I appreciate you. Let me share my screen really quickly. Can you all hear me clearly? All right, sounds good. Let me just share my screen, and then we can get this show started. Hello, folks. Hello. So to begin, thank you for coming to this presentation and this webinar today. We'll be talking about anti-Blackness really in higher education and also in research, and just really overall that picture of anti-Blackness in higher ed institutions. My name is Meligha Garfield, and before we start, I always like to kind of give a brief introduction to myself so you know who I am, and also to make myself more personable. So I'm going to start by going to who am I? My name is Meligha Garfield. I am the director of the Black Cultural Center here at the University of Utah. I'm originally from Rochester, New York. I'm an Army veteran, big brother, oldest is 6. I'm part of an historically Black fraternity. I'm a comic book geek, which I have over $10,000 worth of comic books, Marvel comic books that are limited edition. And you can ask me about different comic book heroes, but I'm mainly Marvel and then some of Image Comics with like Spawn. I'm also a movie aficionado, love movies. I'm a podcaster and voiceover artist, rap and R&B aficionado. So I love music as well, really sampling and music production side, but not necessarily the artist. And then a social entrepreneur, which I host a thing called Let's Talk About It, which brings together strangers to kind of have discussions about different things, anything, really, any topic, but just kind of talk about those different things. And so that is me. I often just kind of share that to open the floor to say, I am not someone behind just a computer. I am not someone that's, yes, I'm a director, or yes, I am staff here on campus, but I have a life. I'm personable. But yeah. So to begin, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, what we're going to be talking about is one, what is racism? And I'm going to briefly talk about that because that is not the overall message of my presentation today, but it is really good to kind of talk about it to give some context of what is racism, at least in the eyes of what I see. And then we will talk about what does anti-blackness look like in relation to racism, and what is the differences between that. We will also talk about how does anti-blackness show up in the broader kind of lens, not necessarily on higher ed, but just in everyday practice. We will also talk about higher ed and in anti-blackness overall in higher ed. I'll read off some scenarios, real world scenarios of anti-blackness, stuff that I have faced, as well as some research in general, as far as some folks that has done some research on perspectives of folks experiencing anti-blackness in higher ed. And then lastly, I'll give you some tips everywhere from administration all the way down to the student on how we can really address anti-blackness in higher ed overall. And then from there, you can ask me any questions you like. All right, so let's start. What is racism? What is racism? Well, over the last few decades, our understanding of racism has expanded beyond a dictionary or textbook definition. A common phrase in social justice work is racism is prejudice plus power. Prejudice plus power. Remember that. Racism is prejudice plus power, which was first introduced by a social scientist by the name of Patricia Badal-Pavita. And I may be saying her last name wrong, so I'm sorry. But she first introduced that way back in the 70s, and really understanding that prejudice plus power really upholds racism. Someone cannot be racist if they do not have that dynamic of power. They can be prejudiced. So black people can be prejudiced, Latinx folks, Asian, white. But in order for someone to be racist, they also have to have that power dynamic as well. And so that's just a simple definition to kind of get you to what does that mean? And so combining the concepts of prejudice and power points out the mechanisms by which racism lends to different consequences for different groups. And that's just the basic. That is the only time I'll really talk about racism to kind of start. And that's the rest of the presentation. We won't talk about it as much. What I really want to talk about, though, today is anti-blackness, because there's a really unique relationship between racism and anti-blackness itself. And so I will begin with anti-blackness, in which Michael Dummis, researcher in 2016, stated that anti-blackness is not simply racism against black people. Rather, anti-blackness refers to a broader antagonistic relationship between blackness and the possibility of humanity. Read it again. The broader antagonistic relationship between blackness and the possibility of humanity. That is powerful. That's some powerful words. Anti-black or anti-black prejudice and also anti-blackness in itself is an unconscious response to the internalized oppression and survival behavior under white supremacy. These behaviors are rooted in competition for limited resources and are structural setups intended to perpetrate the power of white people. This can show up in many different ways, anti-blackness. This shows up here in America, which we have had over 400 years. Slavery to Jim Crow, to mass incarceration, to the huge wealth gaps between those that are black and white, to even, the student debt crisis. We have this huge student debt crisis in our country when I don't know if you know that black people actually have the largest amount of student debt in the country out of any group, trying to fulfill that legacy of going to college and bettering their lives. But we have the most debt. And so understanding what is the intersectionality of that and why that lends to anti-blackness. It can also, anti-blackness is a global thing. It can show up in many different places as well. A prime example is in Mexico, believe it or not, in which actually a long struggled for recognition in an overwhelming mestizo country. There are over 2 million Afro-Mexicans or Afro-Mexicans that have been in the area since the late 1500s. Before even slavery came to the colonies of the United States, there were black people all throughout Latin America, rather it be in Central or South or even the Caribbean, about 100 years prior to the 1619, in which we had the first African Americans or Africans enslaved here in the United States. But the struggle for that is we still have to this day. It was just recently in 2017, Mexico recognizing Afro-Mexicans and black people that live in Mexico, the identity, their citizenship, how they show up. And they've been there since the 1500s, before even the United States was a country. And just understanding that realm of anti-blackness in itself. And so that lends to the larger question, or not the larger stance, is that, again, anti-blackness is a global phenomenon. It is not something that is just persistent in United States. It is not something that is persistent in like the UK or France or so on and so forth. It is a global phenomenon all across the earth where there are black people in and the marginalization in different populations, rather it be in China, rather it be here, rather it be in Latin America. There is anti-blackness going on. And so we have to be aware of that. And what does that mean? So, anti-blackness also shows up in two other terms. The first term being Afro-pessimism, which is a fairly recent term, and it was coined by Frank B. Wilderson III. Afro-pessimism sketches a structural map of the human experience. On this map, black people are integral to the human society, but at all times and in all places excluded from it. Think about that. We have contributed as black folk to the many structures of what this world is today, but yet oftentimes are excluded from the history, excluded from the rewards and reaping of what our earth or our structures of society are today. We are often excluded from the reaping the benefits of those things. Afro-pessimism is not a negative understanding of black people are capable of. Of course, pessimism meaning, being pessimist. It is not to negate or have negative understanding of black people. It is not short-sighted in the denial of black history. It is not a throwback to black nationalism or even a new wave of critical race theory. Afro-pessimism are just theorists who believe that black folk and those who are rendered black are sentient beings and that they have thoughts and feelings and sense of self and community. But those things are disavowed by the world through anti-blackness. It is taken away. The sense of being human simply, is taken away through anti-blackness. And that is Afro-pessimism. So you often hear anti-blackness, Afro-pessimism. And then the third term is Negrophobia, which is an important concept as well. And Negrophobia is the fear or strong dislike of black men and the objectification of black women. It was first appeared in a French novel in 1802 and was later popularized by Franz Fanon, a black French West Indian psychiatrist and political philosopher, in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, in which he provides a psychological and psychiatric analysis of the dehumanization and the effects of colonization upon the individual and the nation, and the phobia and hatred that is spawned from that. And so kind of just talking about that, Negrophobia shows up in a lot of different things, especially here in this country. First, we talk about, I'm a movie lover. So the first blockbuster in our country was Birth of a Nation in the 1920s. One of the biggest movies of all time, actually. And it was about Negrophobia, the white fear of blackness. And that was found all throughout that movie. And it was a blockbuster. It was like today, it was like the Avengers of that time in the 20s. Box office success, big movie showing out. It was showed at the White House, all these different things. But it was talking about that Negrophobia, in which white people literally feared what are the effects of black people in this country. Both, again, the dislike of black men and the objectification of black women. We also can find this all the way in recent, in our parents' lifetime of 1968, which was really when interracial marriage was just made legal. Again, perpetrating that essence of negrophobia, in which it took all the way into the late, almost into the 1970s, for folks to marry interracially. And just that's recent, like that's in our parents' lifetime. And really just thinking about that because again of that negrophobia, they did not want black men to marry white women because they feared that it would, you would, really disrupt the culture of whiteness, in that essence by mixing. And it's funny right now and ironic that actually by 2045, our country will be mixed to the T. But because again, there is a growing sentiment of negrophobia that is popping back up again because of that 2045 really conceptualization in which we understand that there will be a minority majority in the year 2045. And so we have that pop up of again of negrophobia where we shouldn't be mixing, we should not be teaching diversity, we should not be doing this, and all these different things as well. So how does anti-blackness show up in the larger lens in everyday practice? So the first I would say is by avoiding real contact. An example of this is by avoiding real contact with black people. Folks in this country fail to learn about the history and ethnic richness of black culture or the struggles and victories. A prime example in right now, the fight against CRT, critical race theory, as well as just diversity in general across the United States, in which we've had politicians, we've had school boards, we've had teachers, we've had parents, all fighting against this notion that we should not be having inclusive history because it will paint them as the villains. And understanding that it is not to paint people as villains, but just to have more of an inclusive history, to understand that black folks and other folks and people of color, BIPOC folks, have been in this country before even the country's founding and have contributed to every aspect of society, and yet is left out of the bigger picture, is left out of the history books. It's sad when you have a history book in K through 12 and the only things that you learn about black people are slavery, which is on a page or two, and then you learn about civil rights. What happened in between? What happened? What's happening now? What's happening? What is the structures that really understand and give us a larger picture of why blackness is what it is today? We don't talk about those things. we are not necessarily taught about the Frederick Douglasses. We're not taught about, the Fannie Lou Hamers or, just the different aspects of understanding around, again, black people contributing to this country at every aspect, every single aspect. Black people have fought in every war in this country, including the Revolutionary War. The first person to die in the Revolutionary War was a black man. Understanding again that rich history, and yet we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to paint people as villains. And it's not to paint people as villains, it's just to share, like, this is our country. We're where we're at right now. It's beautiful, but there's a history behind that. How do we get to the different places that we're at right now? And so really just kind of understanding that intersectionality. But anti-blackness shows up though when people ignore that and they avoid real contact. The next is voiding the value of black people. And that is voiding the value of black people by often not seeking their opinions and expertise, not inviting black colleagues to partner on projects, not fully listening and integrating the contributions of black people, or asking them to perform stereotypical natural talent roles. Rather be, oh, you're black, you should play basketball. Which is, you can play basketball, people can do sports, it's great. But again, oftentimes in this country, they have deemed black folks can only do music or entertainment and sports. We don't contribute to science, as they say. We don't contribute to this or that. When, again, throughout this history, if I say it again, black folks have contributed to every aspect of our society. And yet it is not talked about. And so avoiding the value and essentially voiding that aspect that we did not do anything in this country. And I have a picture here, and this is of a colored troop that was in the Civil War fighting for the Union, and really just talking about what is his contributions to how we got. This person was literally fighting for his freedom. And yet that narrative is often like, oh, well, the Union white troops saved the day. I was like, no, there's contributions of several folks. Just the same with Native Americans in World War II, in which they've produced a number of contributions to really saving, well, I wouldn't say saving, but really uplifting and making sure that our country was great in the Second World War, and major contributions, but we don't talk about that. And so again, just voiding the value of black people overall is anti-blackness. Another thing that shows up is systemically marginalizing black people and their issues. And this can be seen by not giving space for those issues to be fully understood and centered, but instead moving too quickly to claim that other POC communities face similar challenges. And so, again, the intersectionality of these different aspects. Again, I know, as I stated before, racism itself is prejudice plus power. So I understand that other POC cannot be racist, but they definitely can be prejudiced. And how that prejudice shows up and that anti-blackness shows up is by understanding that in this country, POC and non-black folks can also benefit from the institutions that are at hand, the capitalist society. And we often see that with the model minority myth, with Asian Americans and so on and so forth, in which positions those as a hierarchy of racialization, in which black people are always kind of put at the bottom of the barrel. We don't want to be black. If we don't want to be black, nobody want to be black. And so just systemically marginalizing black folks and their issues, and often saying, well, other people face these too. Oh, you're talking about sexual assault on campus. Well, white women face this. Yes, we understand white women. It is a very huge issue, but we don't talk about at all the systemic issue of black women that are faced on campus as far as in rape culture. And we don't talk about any of that, or just women of color in general in the larger picture of rape culture. Why is that? Again, it's marginalizing those folks and their issues, essentially to say, oh, well, these folks face these issues in broadly instances. So that's a form of anti-blackness. Another form is minimalizing the impact of enslavement and not acknowledging the ways in which daily micro and macro aggressions black people face after their spiritual and emotional well-being. This is a big one. We have today, again, it's crazy. 2022, people fighting. We should minimalize slavery wasn't that bad. The slave owners paid for the slumber of these folks to work, and they provided homes and food. I was like, no, this was the dehumanization of folks, and we're talking about like it was easy. No, it was stripped of everything, even their psychological well-being. They were stripped of everything and had to come to a country that wasn't even a country yet, but they had to come to a land that was already inhabited by Native Americans. And then on top of that, we're told to adjust into the white culture, but then denied when they tried to assimilate. So it's several different things going on with that. But again, anti-blackness is minimalizing that enslavement was really, that happened several years ago. That doesn't really mean, or again, as it shows up in the argument of CRT, we're not the oppressors today. I was like, yeah, you may not be, but maybe your great-grandfather was, or maybe, so on and so forth, someone in your family, or if not, at least understanding how this country was built on the backs of slavery, or those enslaved. The next one is not following black leadership by over questioning the direction, the work, and styles of Black leaders. This is a touchy one right here, because oftentimes, for some reason, rather it be higher ed, rather that be government, rather be local school board. Well, prime example. I can't speak fully on this, but prime example, we have someone that is being put on leave. That's the superintendent of the Salt Lake City School District. Black man, and understanding the comments, or at least what I've read from the news so far, was that people were just mad that he talked loud. In other instances of some things, it sounds like a bunch of microaggressions to me and macroaggressions. But again, just people having that negrophobia of not trusting Black leadership, and not, trusting their expertise or what they bring to the table, their conversations, only treating them as crisis management and not actually upholding them for bigger pictures, as far as, and rather be being proactive and actual equity, diversity, and inclusion rather than just crisis management. Oftentimes we pigeonhole Black leadership to just be crisis managers because we have been doing that since the dawn of this country. Um, it's the problem. It's a larger problem that we have faced. And so, again, that phobia, that negrophobia of not trusting Black leadership to be beyond that crisis management, to think broader, to think bigger, to contribute to the larger aspects of what we can do in the society. And it's particularly here in higher education. And then lastly, as far as in the broader lens, it is assuming intimacy in relationships without putting in the work and being overly demonstrative, of using, rather it be like you're using hey sister, hey girl, when little to no work has been done to build real relationships. And I think this is a big one as well. Oftentimes people, oh, I have a Black friend, or I have this Black colleague, or I have this or that. But are we actually putting in the relationships to build thoughtful relationships, and conquering with equity, diversity, and inclusion, or shoot, even just work in general in higher ed in itself, and across the country? Are people actually building those relationships? And again, it goes back to, we kind of go back to that first problem, in which we avoid real contact. And we just assume that we can build a relationship to be close. Oh, well, at least I'm talking to you. At least I'm doing this, or at least I'm doing that. It's like, no, we don't have a relationship. So why do you expect me to uphold the things that you want to do if we don't even have a relationship? And so just kind of keeping that in mind. And that is anti-Blackness in itself as well. All right. So that was overall. And again, if you have questions, feel free. Shiver, they will be putting in on a sheet, and I'll read them or look at them at the end of the presentation. We can kind of discuss as well. But to go into the next section is higher ed and anti-Blackness overall. So this is what you came here for today. And this is the big things right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with some scenarios, again, real world scenarios. I'm going to read off of folks in higher ed that have dealt with anti-Blackness, and some other aspects. But before then, I want to say that despite expanded access to historically white institutions such as the University of Utah, African American student college opportunities continue to be limited by structural disadvantages and systemic racism. Moreover, legal incrementalism and failures to adequately implement and enforce equity-based policies have limited the participation of African Americans in higher education. Thus, we have to understand that the educational system that is found at historically white institutions such as the University of Utah has historically been a site of anti-Blackness, under which African American children suffer from the maldistribution of material resources, struggle against harmful ideologies and representations, and endure physical and psychic assaults. These anti-Black perspectives have led to African American student enrollment, college degree attainment, and economic advancement to decline. And that is to bring you to a broader picture of anti-Blackness in higher ed. And so with that, we have to understand what I'll be doing, again, is providing you with some perspectives, and then we'll be going over a a particular article by D.L. Stewart, in which he talks about the ideologies of absence, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But before then, here are some scenarios, some real world scenarios. So, I'm just going to read them off. It's kind of like a script, so bear with me. But the first scenario of anti-blackness: the black student approaches a black graduate faculty member about assistantship climate. Scene 1. Black student: I keep hearing from my supervisor that they're getting feedback from other people that I look mean and unapproachable. I don't know what they mean by that. My supervisor told me to try smiling more. Black faculty member: immediately thinking how familiar this sounds and how much they have been given the same message. How does that make you feel? It makes me feel like there's something wrong with me. Like I just been sitting here at the desk doing my work or whatever. I'm minding my business, and so that means I'm unapproachable. I'm only doing my work. What does that mean? It's like they don't want me to constantly be having some stupid smile on my face, or they want me to have a stupid smile on my face all the time. I do smile when it's warranted. I just don't smile all the time. Of course, I'm not going to shuck and jive just to be seen as a professional. Is that what it takes to be in this field? If so, maybe I made the wrong choice. Yeah, I'm thinking of Step and Fetch It and the idea that in order to be palatable and seen as not aggressive, black people are expected to perform for the benefit of white people. Yes, exactly. That's not how I'm set up. All right, so that's the first scenario. I'll go over each scenarios after the fact. Scene 2. The aftermath of the 2016 presidential election highlighted racial animus. And on campus in the residential hall, black students come to black faculty member to debrief how they are feeling. Black faculty member: so, how's it been going in your resident hall? Doc, it's been rough. I got residents, students of color, queer, and trans in distress. My RAs are stressed out. I don't know what to do. I'm dealing with my own responses to all of this, and it's like I don't have anywhere to go to process that stuff, Yes, I understand what you mean. Have you talked with your supervisor about this? You mean my cis hetero white man supervisor? Yes, I did. So, how did he respond? The way they always respond in this department when we, those who are people of color and are trans, bring up stuff like this. We're told that we have to have a job to do and that we can't stop just because we're having a hard time. I know I still have to do my job. I am still doing my job. I just want to have the fact that I just want them to know that the fact that I'm struggling too, not just my residents and other staff, to be recognized and supported. That sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Well, I was told that wasn't his job and I should go to the counseling center. What? I'm sorry that you had to get that kind of response. Yeah, me too. This field does a great job of talking about social justice, but they stuck at actually practicing it. It's bullshit. I mean, I'm sorry, of course, but I can't fake it about it. This field is bullshit sometimes. Scene 3. An impromptu conversation between a black woman professional and a black faculty member. Black faculty member: I just had a black graduate student ask me if she should straighten her hair before going to her first professional conference. I asked her why would she even be thinking about that. She told me that she just hasn't seen many black women in the field wear their hair naturally and was concerned she wouldn't be taken seriously. Black woman professional: oh, I know exactly why she is concerned. I had been told that I should consider straightening my hair before going on job interviews to look more professional. When are we going to get past that nonsense? When did you do that? Oh, trust and believe that I wore my hair natural, the way it grew out of my head. If I didn't get a call back or offer before my hair, that's not a place I want to work anyway. That's exactly what I told this student. Scene 4, in the last scene. Black professional is in office for coffee with a black faculty member on campus. Black professional: Doc, you would not believe what I just had to shut down in this search committee meeting. What do you mean? What happened? So we brought 3 candidates to campus: a white man, a white woman, and a black woman, who was the last candidate. In our last search committee meeting, someone had the audacity to say they didn't think the black candidate would be perceived as professional. I asked them why not. They said that it was because she answered the questions too directly and looked too stern and too stern, and she might be too harsh. Don't you know other people agreed with her in that statement? Wait, they said what now? Yeah, that the black woman was too direct and harsh. Now, the white woman answered the questions just as directly, but they were excited to see if she would fit well into the rest of the office. You're joking with me. You gotta be. I can't believe that no one else in that room recognized how blatantly racist that was. It's such a stereotype that black woman's forthrightfulness is seen as aggressive or hostile. Doc, I wish I was joking. I'm sitting there and I could hardly believe this was happening. So I know you said something. Of course I did, Doc. Not on my watch. All they said was, oh. That's the best they could come up with? Oh, ridiculous. I'm so glad you were there. Imagine what would happen if you wouldn't have been there to disrupt that. I'll repeat that again. I'm so glad you were there. Imagine what would have happened if you weren't there to disrupt that. I know, Doc, I know. I can't be everywhere, though. Scene 4, that was the end. And so those were 4 scenarios, different aspects of anti-blackness showing up, rather than be respectability politics, rather than be changing a body, rather than be showing up and conforming to the larger white gaze, rather be not being so loud, as we say again, in unprofessional, in a job interview, and so on and so forth. And so, to go back again, this brings up by D.L. Stewart, in which he has the rhetoric of inclusion, and he really goes in deep. And I don't have the time to really go in deep with these things, but there's 4 kind of rhetorics of inclusion, 4 domains, which is 1, belonging, safety, validation, and reward. Belonging, meaning we would want to belong at our institutions of higher learning. We want to show up, both faculty, staff, and students. And then the broader community. We all want to show up and feel like we belong at this institution. Safety, we also want to feel safe. Safe to show up how we are. Safe to show up and really be able to lead. Safe and show up and sometimes just do our work and not say anything. That's safety. Validation, the validation of our work, the validation of our expertise, the validation of what we contribute, the validation of that even students paying tuition. I want to be validated as a student attending this institution, that I pay tuition just as much as anybody else, no matter where the money comes from. I'm paying tuition, so I want to be validated in my experiences. And then lastly, reward, as in we should be being rewarded. In that rhetoric and inclusion, rewarded, rather be for our expertise, for our contributions, for showing up, understanding that aspect. But what D.L. Stewart kind of does is he actually flips this on his head. And he says, these are all great and we should be working for a rhetoric of inclusion, but often anti-blackness disrupts that. And he disrupts that with the unbelonging, the unsafety, the unvalidation, and the unreward. And so to kind of break it down, the first being unbelonging, being made to belong, citizenship, is a privilege bestowed upon those who have assimilated to the ways of being, and doing that have been normalized, optimized, and centered within the institutional systems based on whiteness. At the same time, others have made not to belong for failing to display appropriate ways of being and doing. Each of these scenarios that I basically put out to you all that introduced or portrayed a form of absence and unbelonging. The first scenario involves a black graduate student who has been made the subject of conversations about his disposition and fit for the student affairs work. The student is made not to belong for failing to portray the normalized student affairs demeanor or perpetual cheerfulness. This is evidenced by the proposed solution that the students simply smile more. Belongingness also comes up in the second scenario through the supervisor's injunction to his black graduate student to focus on doing the work and not other ways that they personally are struggling with to make sense of the national social political climate. The crux of the message is that the right way to belong in student affairs is to prioritize work and service to others over one's need for caring for the community. Again, I'll repeat, the how it shows up as far as in belongingness and unbelongingness is the right to belong in student affairs is to prioritize work and service to others over one's needs for caring for the community. The third and fourth scenarios illustrate the specific ways that anti-blackness couples with misogyny, or to target black women in the field. Black women's choices around hairstyle and appearance generally, as well as communication styles, render black women unequally subject to unbelonging in student affairs. The next is safety. Like belonging, dominant narratives extend safety to some while withholding it from others. We understand this as an outcome of one's assimilation or fit with the dominant culture. Again, black professionals are both made unsafe and are made to be unsafe for others within the dominant student affairs culture. A return to the opening scenario, which makes this more clearly. The injunction to smile more and to make oneself less intimidating has historically import for black people, and particularly black women. The display of a flat effect, a resting face, to be more cheerful, is interpreted as a hostile, aggressive, and intimidating and mean. The assumptions are made in the absence of any other proactive behavior. Others perceive themselves as unsafe in the presence of black people who is not actively or constantly playing the role of the happy Negro, one who is not shucking and jiving. Alternatively, the enforcement of black smiles and softness will work to render black professionals unsafe and not to free or for them not to be free to express themselves or not to see fit. And then we have validation. Validation is a big one. We have to understand that second scenario really speaks and illustrates validation. We recall that this exchange, the black student and professional in training, is told that their own feelings of unsafety on campus and in the local community has no relevance for the performance of the professional duties. They are told that they still have to do the job and to take their needs for validation and support outside of the workplace to the counseling center. Moreover, in another interaction of this conversation, a black professional is told unironically that the aftermath of the 2016 presidential election that conservative students need to feel safe too. The assertion of the need to preserve the safety of conservative students is made in this total absence of any evidence historically or currently or systematically or systemically, the suppression and silencing of conservative ideologies through law, custom, physical violence. However, black student affairs staff who are witnessing the real-time violent suppression and silencing of anti-racist activism through multiple forms of state violence are told that their needs for safety, affirmation, and support are invalid. Moreover, the haunting specter and ongoing reality of systemic problems are faced with black death are invalidated. Again, huge type of things. And then lastly, reward. Stewart again states in his article in 2018 that the inclusion effort seeks to reward effort and incremental changes on diversity in an organization. This reward system does not lead to the institutional transformation, nor does it disrupt the systems of power that are in operation. Such rewards focus on the cosmetic, the superficial changes easily measured through the quantifiable bit data. The mere presence of black people, as well as other people of color in the student affairs relative to their historical absence, is seen as a laugh. Really, the moderate increases in the proportion of black applicants to a graduate program or their inclusion of black finalists for a position outside of the multicultural affairs and ethnic student services are celebrated. Institutional stakeholders credit themselves for providing support for the signs of progress because, hey, we have these black folks that applied and they're finalists, but are they actually getting the jobs? And And then again, as a result, black professionals are made into rewards and symbols of progress in a power structure that remains unaltered. Moreover, black professionals themselves is unrewarded for the presence, presumed to be the beneficiary of benevolent inclusion efforts by white senior administrators, faculty. Black professionals owe labor and a creative genius to navigate structural barriers to access these institutional spaces is downplayed or even disregarded. Again, not getting a reward. All right, so last section. How do we address anti-blackness in higher ed? That is a huge question, and I'll go through these things fairly quickly. So the first thing is to acknowledge the past and revisit the history of anti-blackness. Again, addressing anti-blackness begins with an authentic recollection of an institution's history and the legacy of racism. We need to acknowledge that racism has happened throughout our country, throughout its history, and even today. And that our systems, even the University of Utah in some instances, have been on a foundation of slavery, have been on a foundation of racism and exclusionary practices. And so first we have to address those things. We first need to identify a task force that could be charged with conducting archival research and sharing its findings with the campus community. Search for letters, for photographs, yearbooks, journals, newspaper articles, speeches, meeting minutes, all talking about that historical record of racism happening on our campus. We need to collect that data, consult with local historical societies, interview former students, leaders, and educators, and share findings publicly. We also need to identify and remove campus rituals, symbols, and artifacts that express racism and anti-blackness. And then lastly, we need to identify tangible and concrete ways to account for the history and legacy of racism against black people. Next step would be to address anti-blackness in the campus culture. That is, by the context of teaching and learning. So what does your curricula look like? As far as in, does it speak to anti-blackness? Is there ways in which you can alleviate? Shoot, a prime example I would even say, as far as in professors and students alike, if you're seeing professors put this in your syllabus, when we list the resources at the end of the syllabi, and it says, hey, the resources you can go to, disability services, you can go to this or that. How often do you see the Black Cultural Center listed as a resource in your syllabi? That is a form of really combating anti-blackness, to show that, validate that there's an actual center that can help with the issues around blackness. And not even just issues, just to validate students' experiences. How many of you have syllabi that don't have even the resource, again, that is put of the Black Cultural Center, the Center for Equity and Student Belonging, the LGBT Resource Center, the American Indian Resource Center, so on and so forth? Like, how many of you have those syllabi that do not put those resources in there? Again, that is a form of anti-blackness. We also have to understand about student services. Underserved. There's more that I can do for you. Under challenge, that is rigorously a rigorous major, I am not sure it's best for you. So again, you have these professionals talking to students. And then unwelcome. Why are you even here in my office? So addressing those different things, addressing unwelcomeness, addressing the under challenge, addressing the underserved, and not speaking in a deficit language when dealing with students. And then human resources. Again, we have the scenario of hiring committees, making sure that there are practices, and we look at that. We cannot just deem somebody unfit for a position because it may not be a fit, as they say, because they talk loud or they have this or that is going on, or they don't fit the description. Like, speak on it. Ask, okay, what does that description look like? What does the fit actually, what is being a fit for the institution look like? Campus visits. Prime example, as far as in the institution itself, I know we are on upper campus as the Black Cultural Center. We're right across the street from the guest house. For as much as orientations and campus tours happen on this campus, I've only twice in my time being here, in the almost 4 years now, have seen an actual tour come up to where I'm at and actually say, hey, that's the Black Cultural Center there. Never. They're not showing the Black Cultural Center. They're not showing the American E-Resource Center. They're not showing these other places on campus. It is usually, the general consensus, and usually these tours are very in depth. They're giving historical record and things of that nature. Are they speaking on like how did the Black Cultural Center come to be, or just simply saying that we're right over here? That in itself is a whole nother thing, but that's anti-Blackness, I would say, as far as in that when we need to evaluate that as far as in how we position our campus resources. The next step, we need to critically examine student conduct, and discipline data. So this is a huge one, student contact. Are Black students overrepresented amongst those referred to student conduct for campus policy violations? Who are the sources for referrals for Black students? Rather be faculty, resident hall coordinators, campus police. Are sanctions equitably applied? And do students have access to an advocate? Who are their advocate resources in student conduct cases? That is an important one as well. The next one is addressing anti-Blackness in the campus and school policing, which is a huge one. Conducting analysis of the campus arrest data, citations, and referrals from faculty. Review complaints filed by students, particularly those that allege mistreatment on the basis of race. Assess cultural proficiency in the hiring process. Include culturally responsive policing as a criteria in performance evaluation. Be intrusive in ongoing professional development that focus on racism and anti-Blackness, the experiences of boys and men of color in education, policing in schools and colleges, and provide opportunities for humanizing and relationship building. Again, that last piece of anti-Blackness, when we don't have people building relationships, there is no relationship there, so we already have a sense of, breaking off of that safety measure. So if police officers actually establish a relationship, and instead of just coming in crisis and actually coming to talk and mix and mingle and do a number of things, really looking at that, what does that look like? Coming to open houses, doing intramural sports with students, not showing up in uniform to come talk with us, and always, having a gun at the hip, coming and actually building a relationship that says that you are part of the community and that I belong also in this community as well, and that we are together in a community that upholds the institution. Then we have devised a comprehensive strategy for addressing anti-Blackness. So rather it be statements of solidarity, make addressing anti-Blackness a strategic priority with measurable goals and resources. So that's a big one. How do we, and I would even say anti-Blackness, how do we make as a goal for the entire university? How do you make diversity and inclusion an actual measurable outcome for the entire university as a goal rather than just a division? So the division of equity, diversity, and inclusion, where, they'll handle that. No, how's, we have our goals for the university. How is one of our goals actually diversity? How is it actually combating anti-Blackness? How do we uphold actual procedures and processes and measurements and data to actually combat anti-Blackness and racism and really uphold diversity, equity, and inclusion? That is important. We also should be adding anti-racism and anti-Blackness to the institutional's mission statement. I think is important. And then also engaging the government board on a consistent basis. So addressing anti-Blackness as a standing agenda item for the Board of Education, advocating for Black representation on government governing boards, and hold special governing board meetings that focus on professional learning, as well as developing clear policies on hate crime and hate speech. That's a big one too. And then I had two more. We have disaggregate student success data to reveal hidden patterns of racial inequity. So again, this is a huge one, huge one. You got access, you got retention, you got campus effort, you got excellence. Again, with access, we have to understand, okay, what is the proportion of Black students that applied, enrolled, and admitted to the university? How are we disaggregating that data? How are we disaggregating their graduation rates, their retention rates? How are we disaggregating One thing that people don't even keep in mind or take in consideration is amongst the black population, are we even accounting for the diversity of blackness? What is the difference between those that are black immigrants and black refugees, and those that are, that are born and raised here in the United States, or that are residents of the state of Utah? Like, are we disaggregating that data to understand like what is the actual performance of these students? If we say, okay, black students are doing well, okay, which black students? It's the same with Asian students. Okay, we can say Asian students are doing well. Is it the Chinese you're talking about? Is it the Pacific Islanders? Are we talking about the different groups? Asian and black and all these other groups are not just one conglomerate. We should be breaking that up and disaggregating that data to really look at what are the really big problems that can be faced or kind of handled as well. And then also reporting on excellence reports. How many black students are graduating with honors? How many are making the dean's list? What is the four-year graduation rates? What is how many black students are being awarded merit-based scholarships? What is the a proportion of black students being awarded competitive fellowships, such as the Fulbright or the Rhodes or the Truman Scholars? Like breaking down that data so we can know how do we handle and actually fix, if we don't address it and we don't break down that data, we ain't never gonna know the data. A huge factor in that I'm also bring up is, as my role as a director of the Black Cultural Center, we often, the rule of thumb is that we can't break down staff data here on campus. It's actually against campus policy, and I think the USHE board, which is the Utah, Board of Education, things of nature, higher education. But you can't break down staff data. So how am I even supposed to know how many black staff we have on campus? Another example of that is not necessarily black, but for the LGBT Resource Center. How do we disaggregate data for those that are identified as queer and trans? We don't collect data on it, like on the different reports. How are they supposed to actually do services and in the reporting and in that aspect if we don't even collect that data in the first place, or even in that self disaggregate that data? So it all talks about that in a larger lens. Disaggregating data is a huge, huge thing that can combat anti-blackness. And then engage in intrusive outreach to black students when racist incidents occur. Again, just making sure that we deploy a response team, and that we really we contact every black students. We meet with folks. We make sure that they're heard, and then if things that they want is also validated and rewarded. And then lastly but not least, build a culture of commitment to eliminating anti-blackness. And I think this is one of the easier ones, but at least you can start by building a culture. So rather it be having reading lists, ongoing professional learning opportunities on anti-blackness, understanding the intersectionality of blackness and what does that contribute to, really just breaking it down, creating a culture where we're learning, having students come to the Black Cultural Center, even if they're not black, having them learn about the history of the people and things of the nature and have them feel validated. And with that, folks, I want to thank you so much. I know we have like 3 minutes or so to answer some questions. Sorry it took so long, but I wanted to just break it down a little bit. But yeah.
No one has typed a question in the chat. Oh, now we have one. Is misogynoir a subset of negrophobia?
Yes. Yes. Again, it is the dislike for black men and the objectification of black women. Objectification, I'm sorry. So meaning that, yeah, all the time, black women, black trans folk are often the subject of objectification in our systems of racism and anti-blackness, and then also negrophobia. So yes, absolutely.
Maybe while other folks are typing questions into the chat, I just wanted to throw in there like a direct, explicit tie into research and your undergraduate research experience. I think the very first tip Director Garfield, that you gave us was like, it was so research heavy, right? And then talking about disaggregating data. So in terms of your positions on campus right now as undergraduate research students in whatever program, in whatever way you're engaging with research, kind of bringing this back to your mentors, bringing this lens back to the projects that you're working on, like, where is anti-Blackness maybe been packed in here that we're not talking about it? Can we bring it up in a lab meeting? Is there a way to disaggregate our data now, or thinking about how you can adjust your own research design in the future, kind of taking all of this information into account? And now there is another question in the chat. So any tips for conducting research and looking for participants? That's a good question.
Ooh, yes. Great question. When you're looking for participants of color, particularly, and then particularly Black folks in your research, really be considerate. Again, validating their experiences, establishing and building a relationship before you just jump into something with them. You have to develop a relationship. And then on top of that, another tricky thing is, yeah, we don't want to experiment. We've had throughout history where research has gone bad, rather be the experimentation of Black women as far as for medical research, or on Black men with syphilis, the trials for syphilis. There's really understand, again, when you're conducting research, what are the legalities of that? What does it look like to build rapport and relationship? But then also they validating their experiences after the fact as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, we are at time. So I'm going to drop the link to the education series evaluation form in the chat again, and share my screen just so we have our closing slide. And I just want to thank you so much, Director Garfield. I think this was so informative and so helpful. I know students, as they're leaving, are dropping a bunch of thank yous in the chat also. But I really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your expertise here. So thank you for presenting.
No, thank you. I appreciate you for having me. And I'll talk to you soon. Come by the Black Cultural Center.